As the story goes, it was in mid-June. The Boy Scout Troop 121 out of Rathdrum, Idaho, had gone on a camping trip. The boys, ages 11 to 12, and their scoutmaster, Doug Davis, had set out to hike a few miles and then set up their tents. They were going to start a fire, learn how to fish, and cook their own dinners. They'd taken all the supplies they need for the weekend. The boys were excited and looking forward to the adventure. They were going to swim in the river and roast marshmallows. They looked forward to playing hide-and-go-seek and seeing the stars shine out in the wilderness. According to the story, the troop got to their camp spot around 11 a.m. and set up camp. They headed down to the river to catch their dinner for the night. After a couple of hours, they'd had enough fish for a feast, so they sat around the fire and cooked dinner. They'd turn in early that night because it had been a long first day. After they washed up, they sat around the campfire to roast marshmallows and tell scary stories. Mr. Davis started by telling the one about the legend of the witchcraft in the area of Rathdrum. The legend had it that witches would line up across a road. They'd hold hands and stop a car. Once they stopped the car, they'd take out the driver and drag him into the woods and sacrifice him to the devil. Mr. Davis told the boys that his grandfather had told him that his best friend had been killed way back when, and that his mutilated body had been found, nailed to a tree, 2 weeks after he disappeared. The boys listened intently as the story was being told in a hushed tone. As the boys leaned in to hear their leader, they suddenly saw his face turn white. He stared past a boy and whispered, "Boys, get into your tent. Right now." The boys thought that he was trying to scare them, and it was working. But he said it again, and this time he said it louder, and as he stood up, "Boys, get into the tent!" And they saw him take his knife out of his belt, and as the boys stood up, they saw several white figures behind the trees, barely visible, silent, not moving, but they were there. Mr. Davis shuffled them into the tent and told them to zip it and to not come out no matter what happened. Then they heard him yell, "Who's out there? I said, who's out there?" The boys were crying and clinging to each other. They heard the rustle of leaves. "Get the hell out of here," they heard him demand. "I'll call the police." Then they heard his voice being muffled, and he was trying to yell, "Leave them alone!" After about 5 minutes, the boys heard the man scream out in terror. The boys did as they were told, and they didn't leave the tent for 2 days. When they didn't come back on time, their parents had notified the police, and they had began to search for the troop. When they found them, the boys were still in the tent, and 3 days later they found the mutilated body of Douglas Davis staked to a tree. The worst part was, he was still warm.